you all for coming today. My name is Ryan Robinson, and I am the Community Associate at Altimetric Collider. So, Altimetric is a company that specializes in keeping our clients ahead of the curve, technically. And the Collider is the community facing side of the company, and we are geared towards tech professionals interested in real life solutions. But I'm excited to have Onorio here today to really get us into the groovy stuff that we have from Dr. Michaela coming up. So, the Collider, we always team up with the Detroit Tech Watch. They're always giving us great, innovative topics to talk about. So, Honorio, thanks for always partnering with us and being such a great guy. And please take it away.
Thank you, Ryan. And I won't talk for very long because Dr. Michaela has got lots of great stuff to share with us, and you want to hear from her, not me. I will say I was privileged enough to see her present at an ACM seminar, and that's when I said to myself, gosh, I have got to try and get her to present to Detroit Tech Watch because she's got so many cool things to share. So without any further ado, Dr. Michaela, take it away.
Thank you so much for the really nice introduction. I'm really excited to be here and to be talking at the other end of the world somehow, right? Like not completely, but it's quite far. And and especially talking about my favorite topic, which is code reviews. And I have a presentation, so I'm going to share that as well because I think it goes along nicely, so that you just have some, some background that that you can follow my story a little bit along. I will try to keep an eye on the chat. We are not like the hugest group, so I really would like to have a discussion in the end, maybe even with disabling or enabling microphone. We can see if it works, right? I think with 40-50 people it might be still possible. Otherwise we can just use the chat. During the presentation, I will have an eye on it, but I can't promise that I will get, that I will really focus on everything. So I hope you can see my slide, the first one. Is that all good? Okay.
Yeah, Dr. Michaela, I can keep an eye on the chat too for you, so you don't have to worry with it.
Good. And and also try not to use the whole hour so that we have really a lot of time for questions, because from my experience with talking about code reviews, people have a lot of questions, and it's also always really fascinating to go into that and have some discussions around it, not only like my presentation. So I will try to do that as well. So my talk is called From Bottleneck to Superpower, right? Code reviews. And I've been working with code reviews, on code reviews, analyzing code reviews, helping engineering teams get better with their code reviews for a long time now, for probably around 10 years. And I've been working on code comprehension, analyzing code, so that and understanding what makes code easy or difficult to understand for engineers. How can we build abstract models from that through static or dynamic analysis, even for much longer, like. And code reviews were so fascinating because I was working at the tools for software engineering team at Microsoft. Right now it's called the 1ES team, One Engineering System team. And our responsibility was really to look at the engineering practices, the tools and the processes that our 40,000 engineers had, right? So we were internally focused on making sure that they are productive, that they're having a great experience. And I looked at different things, at build, at test, and at code reviews. And code reviews really were super fascinating for me, like more fascinating than any other engineering practice. And it was because the experiences were so diverse, right? Some teams really got a lot out of code reviews, a lot of benefits, and some teams were really struggling, and there was everything in between. And so at Microsoft, we really set out to understand, how can we enable our 40,000 engineers to be productive doing that? Because at that time, and this is a long time ago, when I started there, we did the first study on code reviews, and we tried to understand how long it takes, and they were spending around 6 hours on average on code reviews. And I can tell you that now this number is much larger, right? It's a bigger number, and a lot of engineers in many organizations are spending more time. And so it was really important to understand, what's going on here and how can we improve it. And we even owned the code review tool internally, right? At that time it was called CodeFlow. And so everything that we understood working with the engineering teams also feedback into developing that tool. But that was not everything. Like after a while, I wanted to see, how are others, like, even though the code review landscape is really diverse at Microsoft, it's still one organization. And so I wanted to see how others are doing it. And so I broadened a little bit. I started consulting. I started doing workshops, trainings for organizations outside. And in 2019, I actually left Microsoft to really do that full time. So I'm now working with a lot of engineers, and I see really a lot of very diverse techniques, practices, also struggles from small organizations to really large organizations, which is really fascinating. And so today I will share with you more or less my recipe, right? So my recipe about how to ensure that you have code reviews, or how to ensure to transform your code reviews from Bottleneck to Superpower. So many companies are actually investing in code reviews, and this has become like a big boom, especially because of software systems, or especially versioning control systems like GitHub, Bitbucket, and even GitLab, right? So they are not primarily code review tools. They are actually everything else, right? So they are code repository systems. They have like ticketing systems and so on. And one part is the pull request development model, which really took off. I would say it started 10 years ago, but it really took off, I would say 7 or 5 years ago. Everybody is doing like pull requests and using Git and working in that matter. Really a lot of people are doing this. And so I think at that time, because pull requests were just a feature that was enabled, and people started to change the way that they're working, it was natural that you would say, well, you have a pull request, so you look at something of the code of the other person, because they're not pushing anymore, you're pulling it in, and so this is automatically a code review, right? And so at the same time that this pull request based development model was adopted, code reviews started to boom. Like everybody was doing code reviews, and probably people heard all the benefits of code reviews. And so they thought, well, this is great, right? So we are investing and we are doing code reviews. And they were hoping, I guess, for all the benefits, right, that you get from code reviews. And so this is from a study that we did at Microsoft again. And we asked the engineers what the motivations for code reviews are, right? And they said like code improvements, finding defects, increasing knowledge transfer, and so on, right? And if you look at research and empirical data on that, we can see that, for example, code reviews for finding bugs is one of the main motivations, especially like, let's say 5 years back, 10 years back, right? And it's actually happening. So there are a lot of research articles, there are a lot of studies that actually show that there is a correlation between doing code reviews and the reduction of defects, either post-release or pre-release. We also see that unreviewed code is more buggy, has more defects. And a recent study at Google, for example, showed that 80% of the code reviews lead to some code improvements, right? So there are changes that are improving the code base, and 80% is an impressive number. So we see that we are getting those benefits that we are actually hoping for, we are getting them out. And the interesting thing is that I also, when we looked at that in Microsoft, and you could see this really strong focus on finding bugs and improving the code base in the mindset, in the perception of Microsoft engineers, right? We authored actually a paper that was called Code Reviews Do Not Find Bugs. And this was, it was based on our realization and by analyzing all the data that we had from the team, that really a tiny percentage, like less than 50% of the comments are actually about defects, right? And this 15% doesn't mean that they are showing defects or they're finding bugs. It's just talking about, they're somehow related. The percentage of comments that are actually finding bugs or defects is even much smaller. So what are code reviews actually about? Well, they're about a lot of things. And this is based on a taxonomy. But the first class, and you see like the larger the bar is, right? The longer the bar is, the more of comments are in that category, right? Most of the comments about readability. So do we understand the code? Is it readable? What about the comments? What about naming and style and so on? Then it's about organization of the code, where you say, well, is that method in the right class, and is this class in the right package, and things like this? Is there duplication going on? Then we have alternative algorithms that you might use, or data structures, alternative solutions that you could have. And then this is the first bucket, the first class, where we have comments that are related to bugs, like lack or improper validation. Doesn't mean that you actually have a bug, but at least it's related to the bug category, right? And so I made some bugs there, like illustrated which of the categories are related to bugs. So you see, it's not the majority. The majority is about something else. And I think over the time, people also started to understand more and more that it's not only about bugs, right? Code reviews are coming from inspections, code inspections, and their main focus was really understanding the quality of the software. And is it like, can we release it? Or will it explode if we do it? But over the time, because we have this continuous, right? Not this waterfall, we are doing everything, and then we have like a big inspection of the software at the end, or at one end after a long period. We're doing this more continuously. It also started to be more collaborative. It started to become more about awareness, knowledge sharing, and tracing and tracking, mentoring, teaching, learning, right? Not only about improved solutions and accident prevention. And as I said, we see that from research studies, from investigations, that we are even getting those benefits out. But even if we can show, well, knowledge sharing increases in code reviews, we can still ask, is that a good investment? Is that the return of investment? Is that enough, right? So the time that we are spending on code reviews, is that enough for finding the bugs that we are finding, for the knowledge sharing that we have, or for the collaboration that we have? Or are we actually wasting time? Is it a beneficial practice for us? Is still not answered just by knowing that, well, we can get those things, but under which circumstances? What does it take to get those benefits? And to understand a little bit more, I want to look at the pain points, because if you're working with teams, we see they have a lot of pain points, right? It's not like everything is shiny and fun, and we are getting all these benefits for free. We're actually struggling. And so these are just a few pain points that I illustrated. There are even more, right? But it's like, we have large reviews. I mean, it's something that maybe a lot of you are familiar with. There are large reviews. So now I'm like, what should I even look at? Where should I start? I'm overwhelmed. I'm also having time pressure, because I know half an hour is the max I can spend on this review. There might be interruption happening, right? There might be low feedback quality. So I'm waiting a week, and then I'm getting a thumbs up, or I'm getting very low quality comments on my code. So is this reduced code velocity, this bottleneck that we are introducing, is it actually worth our time? And so there are also a little bit more social problems, like bullying, conflicts, feeling attacked. All of that can actually happen in code reviews. And so when I analyzed those, I thought like, oh my God, where should we start, right? Like so much going on. And the picture that I showed before, this is just a sub group of the problems. We have more problems, right? But when I walked over and over and compared the different teams that I was working with and what they're doing, and how are they doing it, I saw that very often we can actually work on two main problems. This is slow turnaround times and low feedback qualities, right? So they are somehow, on one hand, root causes, but also the major issues. So if you're working on those, and if you try to, and this is what I designed my code review workshops around, right? So improving the slow turnaround time and improving the quality also helps us to work on all the other pitfalls, all the other pain points that we have here. And this is the code review quadrant that I often give my participants to look at, the companies that I'm working at, and really asking yourself, where are you, right? So if you think about review speed and review feedback quality, where are you on this spectrum? Are you more in the blocking reviews? So, like it takes a lot of time and the value is really low. It's not a good place to be. And to be fair, not a lot of organizations are in that very stuck moment. Most of them are either in the value reviews or in the admissible reviews, and everywhere between, right? Admissible would be that we are quite fast with our code review turnaround times and the feedback speed, but is it actually worth our time? Like the feedback might be really low. And the value reviews are like, oh, we get a lot of value out of it. It's very thorough, but it takes really a lot of time. And so where we want to be ideally is this power review, where we have like fast turnaround times and really high quality reviews. And so this is from a study from Mozilla, and that engineer said the value of the review feedback is in the proportion to the cost in terms of delays and time spent, right? And so as a mind experiment, I just tell you, well, if you show me your code today and I give you the exact same feedback today versus in 3 weeks or in 1 week, the feedback doesn't have the same value, right? So you forgot about what you were working on, you were stuck, you couldn't maybe move on. So even the same feedback is more valuable today than it's tomorrow or the day after. And so we really have to think about that. And the same is like the value of the feedback also depends on how much the person took, right, to write that value and so on, that feedback. So what I'm proposing is that we increase the review speed and we increase the feedback value at the same time. Who thinks that's a really good idea and can be done? Or is that not possible?
Good idea. Not sure it can be done.
You think so? Yeah.
I think it's a terrific idea. Just not sure it's possible.
Yeah. So who else thinks it's not possible? Who is a little bit skeptic? You have like a thumbs up or a waving maybe now, if you think great idea seems tricky.
Great idea, but yeah, might be very hard to realize.
Yeah.
People need to embrace change, right? We're not going to get better until we get better, and the quicker we try it, the quicker we're going to get better.
Okay, yeah, good one. I like that one. What are others thinking? Like, what could be tricky on improving the speed and the value at the same time?
There are some places that focus on training up lesser experienced devs, and so if they don't have a ton of experience, it might be a little bit more of a learning curve and maybe a little bit more challenging for them to speed up, know what to look for, be able to do that in an effective and efficient manner that is very quick.
Somebody says, like, if you want better quality and speed at the same time, you need better skills. It's somehow related, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Great, yeah. Okay, so I'm actually writing a code review book right now, and I'm close to have the first chapters ready for people to review and to read. And so let's imagine that I ask a couple of you, like, could you take some time looking over my code review book, just the first chapter, right, like 30 pages, and I ask you to do that, and I say, well, maybe even in this meeting, and we just take all 10 minutes, I send it over and you look through it. What will be the feedback that you can give me on my 30 pages?
I don't know. I don't see any grammatical errors. That'd be probably like what I could do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Onorio. It's going to be the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably pretty cursory.
Yeah. It will be maybe a little bit like 30 minutes isn't much time to review 30 pages, right? So I guess that most of you won't be even able to read the 30 pages, right? I think probably all of you. Maybe we have some really speed readers here. I don't want to generalize too much, but I think it's tricky, right? I think it's tricky. If you manage to read like 5 pages, I'm impressed, right? So what will you do? You will go through it and maybe look at how is the look and feel. Maybe you look at the headlines, right? Maybe you look at how it's structured, how the formatting is going. Maybe you read the first paragraph, like the intro, and then maybe you read the ending to get an idea of what is this about. Does this make sense? So you definitely can give me feedback, but it's a different feedback than if I say, well, I give you an hour, and even an hour will be hard for 30 pages, right? I give you a day. Oh, now this whole thing becomes more realistic, right? So one day you could actually look at my grammatical errors on the flow of how I'm writing, right? You could look at spelling mistakes, like have different ideas that you would, turn around. So just saying that there is a relationship, and if we don't have the time, we can't give good feedback. And so this is something that's very common. It's a problem that even with this anecdotal thing that we just thought about, right, is pretty clear to us. And there are also studies around that, right? So this is a study from Cisco, and they looked at the defect density, so the seeded defects, and they looked at how many defects can people actually find in certain amount of times. Like they had the lines of code per hour. So let's say you have 200 lines of code, and you have to review that in an hour. How many of the defects are you finding, right? And you can see that there's a pretty clear correlation that the more lines of code of per hour you have to review, your ability to look at that and find actually problems really declines very drastically. And we saw that also with other things like the usefulness of your feedback. And so from this study, actually, they recommend around 200 to 400 lines of code is the max that a person should review in an hour, right? And most of the code reviews, people don't spend like an hour, they spend half of it, right? Like they spend half an hour maybe doing a code review. And so you can imagine that it's then 100 lines of code. And nowadays we would even say, even that is too much, right? It should be less. It should be even less than that. So there's a correlation, and so you can't rush things. But what does this actually mean for us? What it also means that right now we have a very particular perspective. And very often this is the first perspective that people are thinking about, is like, oh, I'm in front of this code, and how much do I spend looking at this code? Or I'm thinking about the different skill set of the person, right? So, oh, a junior engineer will take longer than a senior engineer. And that's true. But if you look at an organizational perspective, and code reviews are a socio-technical, but also organizational practice, right? It's not something that you do alone. You do it in collaboration with others. And sometimes not with one person, but with 5 or with 2 or with 3, right? So you have an organizational complexity that comes into that as well. And so what we see here is that if we look at the process speed, if we can increase that, we always increase the feedback value, right? So we have to think about how can we actually increase the process speed here. And this means like, how do we make sure that people have enough time, that I'm looking at, that I'm adding the right reviewers here, but also that I'm setting up my reviewers for success. And so I'm going to show you my secret sauce for code reviews, which has 3 ingredients. One is better communication, reducing the reviewer burden, and then increasing the process speed, right? So those 3 things are really what I focus on really highly. And I think they cover a lot of the things that you can do to really make a big impact, like really transition your code reviews from something that's maybe even a little bit dreadful or okayish practice to something that's a superpower that you really think, wow, our team, there are teams that people never want to work at another organization where there are no code reviews anymore, right? So you would say, I'm never going to go away because there is so much learning, mentoring, collaboration, fun in that, right? And then we have like a lot of teams, unfortunately, that think, well, it's okay, right? And they're just used to the problems that they're facing. And then there are organizations or teams and engineers that really have a horrible experience, right? So we have everything in between here. And I think I would love everybody to say, well, this is such an empowering engineering practice. It's like my personal mentor that I have. And not only one, I have 5 of my peers, and they're mentoring me. And this is even for free. It's during the work, right? This would be really cool. And so communication is a big, big factor of that. Better communication. Code reviews is communication, right? The problem with code reviews is sometimes that we forget about it because we are looking at code, We're looking at it in a computer or at a computer screen, and we are giving the feedback through a very technical tool. So we forget sometimes that there is actually a human communication happening here, right? So if we do over-the-shoulder reviews, for example, which is also a way of doing reviews, I think we are much more aware that there's another person with feelings and so on, right? And so what I want to focus on, and this is something that's so important, if you take that away from that talk today, I think I would be super happy. That's the only thing that you have to take away, that code reviews are really, there are always two perspectives, at least, right? So it's these two perspectives are the power of code reviews and the crux of code reviews, right? So this is the problem that you have and the power that you have. And it really depends, again, on your perspective, how you're seeing it. So for communication, it's the what and the how, the technical thing and how you're saying it, right? So the social thing around it. If you think about what, not every code review feedback is equal. This is a study that I did at Microsoft, and we analyzed 2 million code review comments from teams all over Microsoft, right? Office, Windows, Exchange, and so on. And what we saw is, again, you see that these buckets that I saw, the taxonomy that we had before, how many are there? But this is not only about how many there are, but also how useful are they, right? And so we asked the authors, how useful do you think they are? And you can see that some of them are pretty useful, right? And some of them, it's a little bit a mixed bag, right? So for example, readability is a mixed bag, or design or organizations validations. So maybe to summarize here, the main best practices or the advice that I can give is that best practices, validation, finding bugs, all of these are really, really important, and most of the people would agree. Then you have like documentations, and there the things are split. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't talk about readability. Readability is super important for code reviews and for making your code base maintainable, right? It's one of the biggest organizational impacts and team impacts that you can actually have with code reviews. But you have to be aware, very much aware, and I'm going really deep into that in my code review workshops, but I'm just wanting to give you a little bit a thought to think about it, is that the problem with code reviews is that the author is the expert, and there's something called the expert blind spot, right? And they're also really proud of that. And now you're coming in and you say, and so they're expert and they're waiting for really this insightful feedback that you have. And you're coming in, you have no idea about it. So the first thing that you're going to comment on are really superficial things. And this is just how code reviews work, because you're not able to do it. Like if I give you my code review book, what can you look at it? Well, before you haven't read the whole thing, you will only be able to talk about spelling mistakes and grammar mistakes, right? And only have the whole chapter, then you can think like, was this a good storyline? Maybe in the middle, right? But you have to go deeper and deeper. And the more you go into it, the more you can actually give this valuable feedback, right? And so spelling mistakes and grammar, still really important. Who wants to, publish a book with grammar mistakes and spelling mistakes? But still, I probably want something else from you. I want this deep feedback, right? About, is my structure good? Did you learn something? And so on. And we have the same here. So again, perspective. So we have to be aware, and I think awareness is so important, that the author is actually expecting something else, right? So these nitpicks, they really hurt. They are somehow hurtful. And if we can communicate, and this brings me to the second one, right? If we can communicate about this in a better way, and make sure that we understand how that person also receives it. And we have a lot of written feedback in code reviews, right? So it's not face-to-face, there is no verbal clues, there is no body language, there's no tone. And we see that this is really tricky. So this is a study by Kruger about biases in written language. And here's perceived intelligence. And so they sent an email, it's the same email. And the only thing that's changed is the picture of that guy that sends this email. And then they asked the people, so can you rate how intelligent is this person after you read what they wrote, right? Identical messages. And this is what they said, right? Like there's this picture where we have this opinion, right? We have this bias that this is a very intelligent person. And then we have a picture where we think it's not, right? And you see this bias really, really strong in the rating of the two control groups. But what I really like about this study is that they then had a follow-up study. And so they said, well, now you go and you call the person, right? Just phone, no face, right? And so they just had the phone, the tone and the way people are speaking. And then we asked them again, so now that this person talked to you, how would you rate the intelligence of the person, right? And this is what happened, right? So they had now the picture, they had the email, and they had the voice. And suddenly the voice made really a big difference, right? You could suddenly judge much more about the person, or at least the bias was a little bit, going away. And there are many, many other studies. I'm not going too deep into it, but fact is that written language is extremely problematic because the sender has no way, or they have a way, but the receiver is the one that deciphers it and makes something out of it and interprets it, right? And they're missing a lot of context. And we also know from studies that we are always a little bit on the negative, right? So when we have written thing, we are interpreting it more in a negative way than in a positive way. And this is tricky. And so we have to really be aware of it, but you can train that. You can really understand how to phrase your code review feedback is something that I dedicate quite some time into, that we go through and really see how can we phrase it in a different way. Again, these two perspectives that we are able to see, this could be misinterpreted here. The second ingredient is reducing the reviewer burden, right? So now let's say it's not about communication so much, but it's really how understanding that for the reviewer, it's difficult to understand our code. It's difficult if it's a large review. It's difficult even if it's a small review because they're lacking a lot of context, right? And so I said that if you think about this process, we can increase it, right? Or we can improve it. But now if we are back on this very narrow focus of, well, the reviewer gives feedback and we're increasing the speed, what happens? And I said it's not possible, but it was not completely true. There is a way to speed up things, right? So you can make the person faster to look at that code and even more valuable. So it's not how I didn't know how to picture it, but it's not even the same, right? So it actually goes a little bit up. It starts higher. So you have a faster review cycle and you can speed up that person to, and they give more valuable feedback. And that has to do with this perception of how can I actually set them up for success. And so this is, again, it's a similar picture, again, from the Cisco study, right? But now it's not lines per hour, lines of code per hour, it's just lines of code. So I'm giving you my book, and if I give you it in small pieces, I get a different feedback back than if I give you the whole book and ask you for feedback, right? And for code, I think it's even much more complex. I mean, the book, it's not as interactive. It's not as linked. There's not control flow that you have to think about, data flow and so on, right? So it's something very static. But for code, we see that, and this study also, for example, I did at Microsoft, we see it throughout every engineering team. As the moment as we increase the size, whatever size metric we take, right? Files, lines of code, whatnot, right? Commits. As we increase that, we're decreasing the ability of the person to find defect, but also to give useful feedback, right? So this study was not about defects, but really how useful, how valuable is that feedback. And we see a large decline based on the number of files in the change set. And we see that large reviews are actually connected to a lot of other problems, right? So they are root cause for low feedback quality, that it's difficult to review, that you have time pressure, and that you're waiting for a long time. And so really making that small is a lot of things. I'm going to skip a little bit over that because I want to have more time for us to discuss. But the funny thing here is that understanding that and setting up the reviewer for success, you can do that. And I'm showing in the workshops, I'm showing some techniques how to split up code changes, right, to how to use Git and different commands and so on you can use, and tools that can help you here. But I think the most important thing is that you again understand that there are those two perspectives. And so when we were at Microsoft, we asked them about, and this is actually it actually should be a different slide. So I'm going to tell you what the slide should say, right? So this is, I'm using this perspective quite a bit, right? So this is coming back to the documentation part that we had, right? Where we said, well, the value of the comment, some people think it's okay and some are thinking it's not, right? And so when we ask engineers at Microsoft, we ask the same engineer and we ask them, so what is high quality code for you? What are some of the values that you have around here? And they would say, well, no spelling mistakes, right? It should cohere to the coding standards, should follow best practices. But then the same engineer, they would say, well, do not comment on my spelling mistakes because it stings. And this comes back to what I said, right? Like I'm waiting, like I'm working like a week on something. I'm coming up with this really cool algorithm or great solution. And then you're going to say, well, but over here in that comment, you know, there's a spelling mistake, right? It's just not a nice feeling to have that, right? So it's not that people are not aware of it. It's just that this feedback stings, because what I was expecting is that you either praise me and say, oh, great solution, or you say, oh, but you could even tweak that a little bit more, right? So, and now you're superficially giving comments here. And so what actually on this slide, what should be there is that we had something very similar. We saw a very similar phenomena that we asked people, so what do you need? Why is it so painful? And they would say, you know what? I really need more context. I really don't know where's this change coming from. I don't know what to do. And we actually understood that the why is so important to get people's attention and get them excited about it. They have to also understand, why is this change important, right? And they're missing all of this context and they're just thrown in and don't have enough time. But you know, it's again the same engineer. If you ask them, so what about your code review description? Do you think it should be longer or more elaborate? And they're like, no, my code changes are super easy, super simple. No way, everybody can jump in and understand, right? Like it's trivial here, right? And this is the expert blind spot that I was talking about, right? So really, you worked on that for a whole week, and you probably forgot what you ate yesterday or the day before, right? So you also forgot all the tricky problems that you had and the considerations that you had to make to actually come to this code change. So you are also blind to how hard it is for another person to judge. And so people are not writing that code review descriptions, right? So you think like one sentence is enough, or, you know, my commit, my aggregated commit messages, this is enough. But it's not true, right? And this is just one aspect. So you can really work a lot here to help the other person, first of all, understanding that it's hard. They have been in the same meeting, but when it was about your code change that you're going to do, your feature, I can tell you that 100% they're not as attentive about what's going on here and how you have to do that and so on as you are when it's about your thing. They thought about their grocery store list, right? Or you know, some problems that they have on their code, or when it's their time, what they're going to say because they're a little bit late behind with whatever they did, right? So the awareness is something that's very, very powerful. And so you have to give people the ability to even comment on your code, and you can learn that. There's some proven practices, right? So a lot of code reviews really depends on the engineering organization, the kind of code that you have, but there are some universal generalizable things, right? So read through your changes before you send them out, right? And do that also with a code review tool, with some diffing tool and so on. Aim for small incremental changes, cluster your changes together. This is something that I work on, and it has to do with the single responsibility principle and so on, right? So if you can apply that, you can also make code reviews much easier for the reviewer. The context, describe the context, write this code review description, and then really setting up engineers for success through training and education, right? So often engineers, and this was something that was said before, I think Rebecca said it, that, well, you need the skills, right? And people have to even know what to look for. So I see that junior engineers sometimes even don't know what to look for. You never learn it somewhere, right? So very seldomly organizations say, oh, this is our code review process. You have an onboarding and training session. University doesn't do it. Boot camps don't do it, right? So there's really a tremendous low-hanging fruit also, if you give your engineers the training that they need to understand what's going on here. It's a socio-technical practice, even organizational, right? So 3 aspects that we just consider, oh, everybody can do it, right? Out of the box. They're coming out of school, they can do code reviews. Anyway, the third ingredient that I want to talk about is increased process speed. And I start this one with the case study. It's the case study of Google. And I do it because they have a very, very clear engineering goal. And this is making code review as fast as possible, right? And so they do it because, and they're doing also a lot of research in the area of code reviews. They do it because they know if you're making the process faster, a lot of the complaints, most of the complaints are just resolved by that. And so they have a 4-hour turnaround time. And I don't know if you look back at your thing, what is the average turnaround time, but I can tell you it's not industry standard, right? Microsoft has a turnaround time from 18 to 20 something hours. A lot of other organizations have code review turnarounds of a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, right? And so this is really lightning fast. And how are they doing it, right? There are 3 parts to that. And the first one is they have tiny changes, like 80% or 90% of all the code changes are less than 10 files. Well, not that impressive, but less than 24 lines of code, right? Very impressive, like 24 lines of code. So if I ask you, you know, Joshua, I see Joshua right in front of me. So if I ask you, Joshua, what about like looking at my code change and it's 20 lines of code? How does that make you feel?
Yeah, I was just commenting this earlier. It makes me feel really happy. I got the review done in 5 minutes.
Yeah. Well, it depends on what 20 lines of code we're talking about, though, man. If they're 20 lines of assembly, I might take a little longer.
Yeah, true. Yeah, exactly. Very good point, right? Not every code change. There are trivial code changes that are just rippling effects throughout that could be really large. But on average, you know, those are not happening that often. So we're talking about like really a small number of changes. And I think like, it's not like, oh my God, procrastination sets in. When I'm going to have time to look at that, what will this be about, right? And so, sorry, I have to close my Slack here. And so I think this is really something that sets them apart. Another thing that they're doing, which is extremely important, is that they have crystal clear approval criteria. But not only approval criteria, they have also, this is really annoying, sorry. Do you see that, the email, the messages that I'm getting? Yes, you probably see that, right?
We are, sorry.
Sorry, yeah. I have to, this program is so persistent always that it's, even if you close it, it's still there. Like, never forget you're working. Anyway, so they have this really crystal clear approval criteria, which means that the person that approves has to have ownership, right? Nobody else can approve. Ownership, and then they have a readability certification, which is an internal training that they have to go through, and they also have to refresh. And this training means that I know exactly how to review code for a specific language and framework, right? So for example, let's say JavaScript and Angular or JavaScript and React. So I'm certified for that. And only if I have this certification, I can actually give my thumbs up. So this sounds very strict, and it's strict, but it also means people know what to do, right? So it's not like a guessing, and they have also extremely clear style guides, best practices, what is allowed, what's not, right? So people know what to expect. They know what to expect when they give their code in, and they know what to expect or what to do when they review the code. Another really, really important thing for the 4-hour turnaround is that 75% of all the reviews are approved only by one developer. And Google knows, and there is research, we did research, they did research, right? That the better number is 2 reviewers. 2 reviewers are finding much more things than 1 reviewer. 3 reviewers is a little bit, you know, your return of investment declines a little bit. They're not finding so much, but 2 is actually a really good number. But you know, they say, well, but 2 people, can you imagine the just from a managerial perspective, like they have to organize it, you have to wait for this person and then another person. So just synchronizing the calendars, the workload that you have double the workload and so on. So they're going for a strategy where they say, well, we have really small changes, but to have small changes, you have to have a fast turnaround time. Otherwise, you're waiting for 20 lines of code, you're waiting a whole day or 2 or 3, right? Would be not a good thing. And so they're making this trade-off and say, well, we are going for speed here. And we think that the speed and the fact that we are actually reviewing small things and people can actually find the errors, right, is better than having like 2,000 lines of code reviewed by 4 people where nobody can actually understand what's going on here, right? And so I think this is really an interesting thing. It doesn't mean that all of the reviews you see there's a percentage, 25%, that people are still reviewing where there are more people. So depending on the code change, you will invite more people into risks. And so the question is, I'm not advertising for Google here. I just give you one example. I don't want you to be like Google. Please don't go out of this meeting and say, oh, this is what we are going to do. Like propose tomorrow, like this is what we are going to do. It's something that suits them very well, but you really have to think about your own organization and your goals that you have, right? And the goals, I think this is the most important one, the goals that you have for your code review strategy, those should dictate. And from those, you should derive your policies and your workflows and your processes and practices, right? And so coming back to, what you get out from code reviews, finding defects, improvements, awareness, mentoring and teaching, tracing and tracking. And now I ask people, so what do you want to get out of that? All of them is the answer, everything. And that's not a good answer, right? Like there's like this triangle where you can have like not all 3, but you have to make some sacrifices, trade-offs. And it's the same here, because if you want all of that, you're getting almost none of them, right? And so you can have this on an organizational level where you say, well, as an organization, the most important thing for us is finding defects, for example, or collaboration, learning and mentoring is actually a really good goal to have, right? Or collaboration. And then you can have that also on divisions levels, right? So if you have like a web app that can be really quickly updated, and if you have a problem, you can solve it really quickly. It's different than if you have like a driver software division, where it just takes more time. You will have different goals maybe. And then I urge you to have the same consideration around each code change. Like for each code review, what do I want to get out of here? Do I need to find all the defects? Well, then I definitely have to have a senior engineer, but not only a senior engineer, but research shows that you have to have an engineer that saw those files again. Like they are just in a different atmosphere, like or sphere, right? To give and look at this code. They have an understanding that doesn't matter how much experience the other person has, they have to get that, right? So we see constantly that if you have looked at this code again, and this has to do with how much do you understand that code base, they can give better things. But if you want to learn here, right? If you think, well, it's not that risky of a code change, but it's a good learning opportunity, then you add the juniors onto it, right? And so it's definitely not something that you should do in an ad hoc base, but you should do it very systematically as an organization, as a team. And then in a framework, you should do it ad hoc per change set, right? And saying, well, this is our criteria and this is how we know, and we can actually do that. So there, obviously you should run tests before you start with the code reviews, right? You should automate as much as possible every tedious task. You don't want, your engineers to fight about small things, even spelling mistakes, like you could have like a Grammarly plugging, for example, for your IDE and so on, right? Tools really have a good CI/CD integration. Know when to skip, or, like skip and indicate is more meant as, again, this change. Know exactly how deep do you have to look there, who should look there, right? And then really have crystal clear criteria so that people know what they should do, what they're supposed to do, and which engineering values we are having here. So the takeaways a little bit are better communication, right? Reducing the reviewer burden, and then really having extremely goal-oriented processes and policies. And I think education and training is really lacking in this area. This is also why I'm so excited about it, right? And so I think this can really go a long way, even as an organization, having brown bags about that topic, right? Sharing what others are doing, having, senior engineers that really know how to do code reviews, showing that to others, or really having workshops around that topic. I want to plug something. It's my podcast before we start the Q&A. I don't know if you are aware of that, but it's called Software Engineering Unlocked. So if you want to go there and look at it, would be cool. And otherwise, I'm actually at the end. We have a couple of more minutes, so I'm really, really excited to just have your questions. And I completely forgot about the chat, as I always do. I always have like this intention to look at the chat, and then I'm like, oh my God, I cannot talk and read at the same time. So
I was keeping an eye on it, Dr. Michaela.
Okay.
It didn't seem like there were any questions, just a few comments.
Mm-hmm.
But first of all, thank you so much for your time. I know your time is precious, like any professional, and I appreciate you giving it to us. I had a question to start, and then I should hand it over to other people because I tend to talk a lot. In terms of style, because you pointed out, one of the things you pointed out was like people get annoyed, like that's my coding style. Don't comment on that. What would you say? I mean, is that something that we should, like when we're doing code reviews, we should just say, okay, I'm just going to ignore this as a stylistic thing, or is it worth bringing up?
So I think it really comes back to engineering values, right? So as an organization, you have to have, or as a team even, right? So I'm actually more for team engineering values. So I think it's probably comes down to that. But my recommendation is definitely have a style guide, follow that, use best practices. It pays off in so many ways, right? So it means that engineers from other teams can come in, understand your code. It means that people know what to look for, how to do it. And actually, there's really very, very impressive research about cognitive load, right? And cognitive load means how much processing power does your mind take to understand it, which comes right back to maintainability, readability, understandability of your code. And so what we know around that is that most people say 7, but actually it's more like 4. People can keep 4 items in their working memory, right? And so what we also see, like design patterns, for example, are so valuable for the working memory, because suddenly you're not looking at line by line and you have to remember certain lines or file structures, but now oh, this is a singleton patterns, for example, right? Or this is a factory pattern, and suddenly you know so much about the code, that it's not line by line anymore. And this is, for example, how chess players, the best ones in the world, work, right? They're not remembering, oh, this figure is over here and that is, but they're understanding like pictures. And so now they can hold 7 pictures where it's the complete outline of this chess, versus not such an experienced person would like need to know where it is. And this comes back to our code as well. So just naming is extremely subjective. So you can, there are actually best practices, people are working a little bit on that, but the main important thing is coherence. So if I say, thinking about my variable should be maximum amount, maximum, max amount, max of something, right? So you can have like a really large variety of that, but if you have like a very clear coding style that says, well, we always say max amount, and this is, and it's not going to be after that, it's like max participants and then participant max, but it's always the same. It really goes a long way. So consistency is really key here, and be it like the file structure, where do we put things, how do we name things. This is really important for readability. So I would also encourage people to keep that in the code reviews and enforce that through code reviews, and have people on explain why. There's even research that you can point to, that you can say, well, we are doing it this way because, and it's reasonable.
as someone pointed out in the chat, that basically having a style checker formatter and putting it in as a pre-commit hook is one great way to eliminate that issue of, oh, my style is so-and-so, but your style is so-and-so. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's also what I would say, right? So automate, those things should be definitely automated, was under my point of automation. For naming, it's really hard, right? To have that, but also you can have a lot of other things that you define in your style guide or best practice guide, in your guidelines for how code should look like, that cannot be automated, and it will make the discussion also much easier, right? So if it's in there, we discuss it. If it's not in there, then your thing goes through, or we put it in there, right? Like these are the things that you can have.
Now, anybody else want to ask questions? I talk a lot, but please ask your questions. Dr. Greiler's got a hard stop at 1 o'clock, but you got 4 minutes yet. So anybody's got a question?
I don't necessarily have a question, but I wanted to thank you for doing all of this research and letting us benefit from all of the laborious work you have put into this and figuring out what works and what maybe doesn't work. Thank you for coming and taking time to talk to us. I think we can take some pieces from this and improve our area. So
that's really nice. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
Doctor, I'll follow
let us
on.
know when that book is out, seriously.
Yeah, I'll follow on to Rebecca's comment right there. As a project manager, I don't code, right? But I support teams who do, and I see a lot of cross pollination of some of the behaviors and practices that make coding and code reviews better, spanning across all roles in IT. You focused on some key principles that are, I think, some very simple truths that make the entire development process a lot better. It's focus, it's clarity, it's context, it's look at this, don't look at that, right? It's creating a conversation around this is why we're here, this is what we need to do, and this is what the output should look like. And while this conversation has been very focused on development and code reviews, there's a lot of similarity in a BA discipline or a QA discipline, or even for me as a project manager, how we get better as individuals and teams, as organizations. There's a common pattern, and you delivered the message amazingly. Thank you for taking the time to do this.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree with everything that you said. And for code reviews, it means that whenever I put somebody on there, right, every code reviewer should know exactly why they are there, right? And it doesn't even stop with code reviewers, right? You could even put a product manager there or a UX designer, but they should know why they are there, right? The same for cross-functional team. Like, why do you put an engineer from another organization, like another team on there? They should know what should they look at. And it shouldn't be like, just to say, it shouldn't be the same than the peers that you have in your organization, in your team, right? Yeah, love what you said. Thank you.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are a lot of organizations, like you said, where code reviews are looked upon as a burden. Oh, we've got to do this because they tell us to, as opposed to being looked upon as a chance to improve the code and catch defects before they get very far and stuff like this.
Yeah, and learning, right? And I think it's also, it comes back also to the organizational culture, that very often engineers, they are supposed to do code reviews, but then they are incentivized and measured. The performance is measured by features that they're delivering, right? And so they're really in this, they're doing sacrifices for code reviews. And if you're setting it up this way, it's just not, it's not working, right? It's really a problematic setup.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I see it's almost 1 o'clock or 7 o'clock your time. So thank you so much for your time, Dr. Greiler. I really appreciate it. And in the chat, Ryan posted like a link for a survey. And was there a link for the recording also, Ryan, or that's going to be up there later?
The link is to our YouTube channel in general, but
okay.
I will be emailing everyone this video, and the YouTube link is just so you can stay up to date with the content that we put out, just like similar to this, as well as just stay in touch with us. We encourage you to reach out.
Okay.
And thanks so much, Dr. Greiler and Onorio. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really honored that I could be here. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
The pleasure is all ours. Thank you so much.
you.
Yes, thank you for the generosity of your time, indeed.
Thank you. Okay, have a good day.